Hey guys, and welcome to another huge episode of Triggered. I hope everyone's doing well today. We have a great one today because America just turned 250, and the question now is not whether we can throw a good birthday party. We've already answered that question. It was pretty epic. The question is whether we still understand what we are actually celebrating and whether we're willing to keep it in the decades to come and for the future. We'll be joined by Ned Ryun. He's the founder and CEO of American Majority and the director of a brand new documentary called The Thread of Liberty, Keeping Our Republic. So guys, make sure you're liking, sharing, subscribing so you never miss one of these major episodes, okay? Hit the like button, share it with your friends, get it out there. Subscribe so you don't miss one of these major episodes. If you do miss the show here on Rumble, catch us on Apple, Spotify. If your friends get their podcast that way, make sure they're aware. They can go over there and check it out. For all of the headlines that we cover here on the show, check out my news app, MXM News, like Mike, X-Ray Mike, minute by minute, MXM News, where you can get the mainstream news without the mainstream bias. And of course, thanks to our brave sponsors for having the guts to support this program, okay? It takes guts to support this show, I can assure you. So check them out. And if you're going to be out there getting some of these things, why don't you spend your money with those who share your values? Washington debates are complicated. This one isn't. Cell phone carriers use mobile locking to trap your phone on their network, keeping you stuck with high prices when switching could save you $1,000 a year. Americans are fed up. 93% of voters say switching carriers should be easy, and about as easy as keeping your number. You should be able to take your phone without being locked into the rules, okay? If you agree, speak up. Tell officials you want hashtag cell phone freedom, okay? Cell phone freedom. Paid for by the Bull Moose Project. Again, that's hashtag cell phone freedom. And guys, we have another familiar face sponsoring the show now, Goldco. Gold just surged past $5,000 an ounce. Silver blew past 100. And the U.S. just added silver to the critical mineral list, meaning it's now considered crucial for American security and economic survival. This isn't speculation, this is real. That's why I've renewed my partnership with the #1 rated gold company, Goldco. A+ rated by the BBB, the Better Business Bureau, and they've helped Americans place over $3 billion in gold and silver. So visit donjrgold.com, DONJR gold.com, to get a free 2026 gold and silver kit. And because you're part of this audience, you get up to 10% back in bonus silver or gold just for getting started. Again, that's donjrgold.com. Do it now. Educate yourself. What do you have to lose? And before we get to Ned, let's take a few minutes to cover some of the top headlines. And I want to start in Pennsylvania because yesterday my father brought together the people who actually build the things that keep this country safe. Ships, radar systems, military technology, all of it. The announcement was nearly $10 billion in new defense investment in Pennsylvania. More than 4,000 jobs, new ships built at the historic Philadelphia shipyard, and major new commitments from companies that have spent too many years being told to build somewhere else. Check it out.
But since I took office, defense investments in Pennsylvania are up by nearly 25% compared to crooked Joe Biden. And today we're adding $10 billion, and I think the number is going to end up being about $19 or $20 billion. And we'll be building 2 massive national security multi-mission vessels at the beautiful and historic Philadelphia shipyard. I met all the guys doing this, worth up to $1.5 billion, and it's a purchase of lots of vessels. We're going to have a lot of vessels being made there. We're also thinking about doing some purchases outside of companies that come here and build, have to reteach us. You know, we used to make a ship a day, and now we're a laggard in that department. We do lots of great things, but we're a laggard there.
For decades, the geniuses in Washington treated the American industrial base like it was disposable. Send the factories overseas, let the shipyards die, depend on foreign countries for your equipment, even our own military needs, and then hold another hearing about why everything costs so much and takes too long. Now the direction is changing. Build the ships here. Build the radar here. Hire the welders here. Train the next generation here in America, the way it's supposed to be. And this is more than defense spending. A country that can't build cannot remain free for very long. If your supply chains belong to your adversaries, if your factories are empty, if your skilled workers totally disappear, then your independence exists on paper and literally nowhere else. Real sovereignty requires real capacity. It requires citizens to know how to actually make things. Communities that can support families and a government that remembers its first responsibility is to its own people. That's fundamental. It's critical. Which brings me to the other responsibility of citizenship, voting. J.D. Vance went on Joe Rogan and put the voter ID argument in the plainest, simple terms, okay? The plainest possible terms you could have imagined. Every serious country verifies who's voting. Normal Americans support it. You need identification for 100 less important things in everyday life. Frankly, I'm sure you need identification to get on food stamps and government assistance programs. You can probably use it to vote. But somehow, when you ask for ID before somebody chooses the government of the United States, I don't know, Democrats act like you've proposed the end of democracy. Watch JD in his own words.
You actually
that's
saw
insane. Not only did they not have voter ID, you can't show your ID. You're not allowed to show your ID.
You can in fact be like prosecuted if you try to force somebody to show their ID.
Which is seems like you want people to cheat.
Exactly.
And is this from the same people that were saying you have to have an ID that shows you've been vaccinated just 4 years ago
to go to
a
grocery
restaurant
shopping or to go to a restaurant? Yeah, no, it's definitely that's the part about it that I think makes most people of my political persuasion skeptical of what the Democrats are doing.
Yeah.
Like, if you don't want to cheat in the election, then just make everybody actually show an ID. What another thing people don't realize is, I didn't realize this until a couple years ago, the voter ID solves a lot of the mail-in ballot problem. Because if you have to show an ID in order to get a mail-in ballot, in order to actually, confirm that there's a real identification attached to that vote, that solves a big chunk of the problem too.
This is just logical.
Yes.
Like, I'm not
Every country does it.
I'm not skeptical. I'm accusing them. I think they stole the election.
Citizens vote. Legal ballots get counted. The rules are clear before Election Day. Everyone has to play by those same rules. That's not voter suppression, guys. That's literally like the minimum standard for self-government. Okay? And tonight, my father will deliver remarks on the very issue and reveal even more findings about actual foreign interference in our elections, including Chinese access to voter rolls, buried intel reports about voter fraud. Let's just say there'll be major declassifications and much, much more. This is what federal power is actually for. Protecting the country's institutions, defending citizens, going after foreign criminals who target Americans. Not, deciding what kind of stove they can buy, whether they can have AC or not, or what temperature it should be set at. Not turning every agency into a political weapon. Not handing more power to some unelected bureaucrat who thinks your life is a problem for him to manage. Build and preserve what keeps America independent. Protect the integrity of the vote. Hunt down the people who attack American citizens. Simple. Those are the jobs of a serious government. Check this out.
The founding of America makes you believe in Providence, if you don't already.
Nearly 5,000 years of recorded experience said free people could not sustain self-government for long. Every republic had failed.
The framers of the Constitution took a trip through the graveyard of past constitutions, the 12 tablets of Rome, the Athenian Constitution, what we have of it. They looked at everything.
Their aim is to outdo the glory of Greece, outdo the glory of Rome.
And if they failed, what would happen? They would be hung as traitors.
This experiment in self-government is actually a blip in the broader scheme of recorded human history.
They knew how fragile this was.
The transformative thing about the Declaration was this idea that everyone is born with rights. Rights don't come down from on high. They're not granted to us from a king.
Our system of tripartite government, Bill of Rights, checks and balances, it almost doesn't exist anywhere else.
I'm Ned Ryun. Join me as we trace the thread of liberty and ask the most urgent question of our time. Can we save the Republic?
And with that, we bring Ned Ryun, the founder and CEO of American Majority, and his new documentary, The Thread of Liberty, Keeping Our Republic, is now available at threadofliberty.com. Ned, great to have you back with us, man. How you doing?
I appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity, Don.
So, Ned, America just turned 250. You've spent years working on this film. What do you want Americans to feel about it, when the credits roll at the end of the show? What do you want people getting out of this?
A couple things. One, I want this to be a rebirth or renewal of instinctive patriotism. Alexis de Tocqueville writes about it in Democracy in America, but instinctive patriotism is that inborn love of country because it's our country. And for people to have that renewed again, but also to renew, Don, an obligation to the experiment. I want them to be inspired. This is an incredible story. The founding of America and the last 250 years, incredible story, but to also renew that obligation to the experiment because America is not on autopilot. Mm-hmm. I think it's the duty and responsibility of every generation to take up that thread of liberty, to carry it on for the next generation, to be able to enjoy freedom and liberty and our way of life.
Yeah, I mean, we see the threats to that, daily, especially, on our side. So, the title is The Thread of Liberty, Keeping Our Republic. So what is, in your mind, the thread? Where do you think it's closest to breaking right now as well?
So we wanted to kind of tell the story from the founding and how every generation, and Don, I consider myself a pretty close student of American history and American politics, but I was just reminded in producing this film how many inflection points where this experiment could have failed. But we kind of cover 5 chapters in the documentary where at these inflection points, that current generation decided, I still feel that moral obligation to the experiment, and I'm going to grab hold of it. I'm going to find the political will and courage to continue the experiment, to pass it on to the next generation. So, the founding of the country, the revolution, Civil War, Reconstruction, and then we lead into the modern era where I think we're in another inflection point in which we're dealing with the administrative state. And it's going to be a question of, do we as the current generation still have it within us to grab hold of that thread? Do we understand what the thread is, what it means to be an American, what it means to be a self-governing republic, to grab hold of it and say, we're going to hold on to this thread, renew it, and pass it on to the next generation? So just kind of this theme of throughout our entire history, every generation at a certain point has decided, yep, I still feel that obligation. And I hope this current generation does as well.
Well, I think you definitely see plenty of people, at least on our side right now, pushing back on the administrative state. I think you're right. That's probably one of the great, threats to that thread, right now. But it does push back. I know that as well as probably anyone. My family certainly sees that as well as anyone. How do Americans sort of, get over that and say, hey, we still have to get in this game. We can't allow it just to happen because, we understand the consequence of actually even attempting to take action. What are your thoughts on that? And how do we make sure that those values are instilled in that next generation to say, what, it's going to be inconvenient, but you got to fight. Everything that you got to fight for that's worth fighting for, has a component of it, significant inconvenience.
Right. Yeah, no, I just think about Thomas Paine and the crisis. What we gain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. 'Tis dearness only that gives every man, gives everything its value. And we have to decide if this is valuable. And it is. I mean, Don, I think the founding, and I'm kind of quoting Ken Burns here a little bit, who's not exactly a conservative, but one of the most important events in world history since the birth of Christ was the American Revolution and the founding of the free American Republic. We have to understand in many ways what we have, the free American constitutional republic, was the pinnacle of Western civilization. Mm-hmm. The first time ever in world history that we had a rights-based republic in which the people were sovereign. And I think one of the things that I think we've been losing sight of, I would argue the 20th century has been a lot of progressive propaganda on a whole host of levels, even into the 21st century. We have to tell the true story of the founding clear-eyed. I mean, we deal with the issue of slavery for about 10 or 15 minutes in this documentary. And we examine, where the founders had their flaws. But at the same time, the incredible things they set in motion, and even though they weren't able to successfully deal with some of the issues that we've been dealing with for millennia, they put in motion the fact that all men are created equal. I would argue they really set in motion the abolition movement. And eventually, as de Tocqueville said, we have a great capability as a country to repair our faults. So I think people have to have a better knowledge of who we are. You can't love what you do not know. And I look at the younger generations and also think you're never going to defend what you despise. And that's a real issue with our indoctrination centers. They've been taught to despise this country and the founding.
Yeah, well, that seems so incredibly intentional. But I guess the film really makes the case that the American founding wasn't some accident or a collection of slogans, and it wasn't memes, right? It came out of literally thousands of years of thinking about human nature, power, law. What did the founders understand about human nature that perhaps modern Washington has forgotten?
Modern Washington has forgotten a lot. I'll get to that.
Almost all of it.
Almost all of it. This is my concern, Don, and we'll address this at some point in a little bit here. But one of the reasons I did this film is, do we actually still know what we're seeking, what we're trying to renew? Have we lost the vision for what we were actually given? We have to be reminded of that. But, no, the founders were incredible students of history. Yeah. They went back through the graveyards of history, and they looked at the Roman Republic and the Greek city-states and all of these things that had failed along the way, and tried to figure out, why did they fail? How can we actually deal with some of these things? Like James Madison thought factionalism was one of the great threats to republics. How do we set faction against faction and diffuse power? So they were realistic too about human nature, right? We're imperfect human beings in an imperfect world, yet we've been given these God-given rights. So how do you secure God-given rights, yet don't trust imperfect human nature with too much power? So that was one of the things they were struggling with. But they were also in the flow of thought from John Locke and some of these other English Whigs, in which the whole purpose of government was to secure our natural inherent rights. That's the entire legitimate, just purpose of government. And so they were determined, we are going to create a rights-based government. And that's what they did. And that was one of the most unique things that had ever happened in world history. And they thought they'd been able to solve a lot of the problems that previous republics had been unable to solve. And that's and why they'd eventually failed.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of reminds me of sort of the beginning of our journey onto the political side of things.
Yeah.
At first, I got in, I was like, hey, I'm fighting to preserve, this nation that, and these ideas that, were so firmly entrenched. And it actually turns out that was it was a lie. It was like, you're sold this bill of goods, and those things didn't actually exist. They'd been taken away by the administrative state or by big government or whatever. And it turns out I was fighting to actually create an idea that was probably at its inception with the founders what they intended, but had not really existed in a long time. So it was almost, trying to create what should have been, but perhaps got lost along the way. What are your thoughts on that? And where did it start perhaps going a little bit awry? If you agree with my analogy.
I do. I would argue we started taking a turn for the wrong in the wrong direction with the presidential election of 1912. That was the election of Woodrow Wilson, really the beginning of the administrative state, and a complete and total rejection of the founders' philosophy on human nature and on the role of government, right? Progressives really thought human nature was perfectible in the here and now. They thought government was the source and the giver of all rights. They thought that the state was the vehicle by which you would achieve perfection in this world. And so I would argue we've been dealing with this thinking for well over 100 years. And I agree with you. I would argue that America First movement in many ways is about a great restoration of what was. Because you and I both know we can use some of the same terms. We still use a lot of the same terms, separation of powers, and we have the legislative, the executive, the judicial, and we talk about federalism, which is a lie right now. It doesn't exist really in reality. So we use the same terms, but in essence, we are completely different from what the founders envisioned. So how do we restore in the essence what the founders gave us and actually return this to a government of, by, and for the people, in which it's actually representative government on all aspects? Again, that's another thing I would argue the administrative state has completely hollowed out. And so, no, I agree. I think we're in the middle of and have a shot at the great restoration. But how we've been operating in D.C., the sad part is I think progressives were extremely successful in removing the essence of the constitutional republic and replacing it with the unelected bureaucrats in the administrative state.
Well, I think the other big one is, and one of the big ideas of the film is that rights came from God.
That's right.
Government does not give them to us. They came from God. And whether we have separation of church and state, those unalienable rights still exist from that creator. Why does that distinction matter so much in a country where more and more people really just expect the government to solve every one of their problems?
Yeah, this is one of the things where I would remind people, if you really think that rights come from government, the government is the giver of all rights, a government that's big enough to give rights is also big enough to take away the rights.
And they will, because as we have seen, that's not just theory, that's practice. Yeah.
Right. It's one of those things where the founders of this country believed government should be limited in size and scope because they didn't trust government. I mean, they didn't trust themselves. That's the amazing thing, Don. When you look back at summer of 1787 and they're constructing the Constitution, they didn't even trust themselves. They're like, we got to diffuse power. We have to have separation of powers because we don't trust ourselves as human beings, and human beings should not be trusted with consolidated power. But the most important thing, and I think the difference that we're dealing with, and I know this is probably a shock to like Senator Tim Kaine, rights do not come from government. They come from a creator, the transcendent creator who gave us these unalienable rights. And the purpose of government is to secure them, is to protect them, is to make sure that every right that we've been given by our creator is protected and none are taken away. And I think we've lost sight of that. And so I would argue the big struggle at a fundamental level is, how do you view human nature, and how do you view the role of government? And if you view human nature as perfectible and the government as giver of all rights, you're probably going to tend towards statism and the progressive way of thinking. If you believe that human nature, we're capable of great good, we're incapable of sustained good, we're imperfect human beings, and government is meant to secure rights and take none of them away, you're probably going to be more towards the conservative side of things. So those are some fundamental things that I think we've lost sight of in D.C., and I would like to see a lot more Republicans, quite frankly, actually get back to that idea of we should be making sure that government is protecting and securing the rights of the American people instead of just sitting there as like bystanders.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned them earlier, but back in the 19th century, Alexis de Tocqueville sought churches, charities, local associations, and ordinary citizens doing the work of self-government. We've spent over a century, moving that responsibility into Washington. What have we lost in that trade?
I think we've lost a bit of our humanity, to be honest. Like the essence of, we've lost that. We've had the essence of the experiment hollowed out. I mean, the American Republic, when Alexis de Tocqueville came here in the 1830s, he was kind of shocked and stunned by the American Republic, in which he realized a lot of the self-governance that he saw in action started at the local level, at the township level, and realized that people were solving problems for themselves in a very efficient way. And so I think you lose a lot of things in regards to kind of part of being human is the struggle, right? We look at these challenges, go, we need to solve these. We don't pass it off to somebody else for their responsibility. But I also think it's hollowed out, Don, and this is the sad part. I think it's hollowed out a lot of the family in many ways because we've replaced the family obligation and put in government institutions to take the role of the family, to take the role of the father. And so we've hollowed out a lot of the things that are very fundamental to the experiment, but we've also hollowed out the family, which I would also argue is very fundamental to the experiment, being a long-term success.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think last time you were on, we were talking about your book. You wrote American Leviathan and made a documentary about the administrative state, right? I mean, is the permanent bureaucracy now the biggest structural threat to the constitutional republic that we face?
It is.
How exactly do we break, its power in a lasting way, right? You have sort of Trump has been a crudgel against some of this stuff. Right now, that works. But you get another, let's call it a more bureaucratic president, along the lines of everything we've experienced for the last 50 years, back in power. And that can go right. How do you make that? How do you get that to have staying power?
So one, I totally agree. People, want to talk about all these threats to the American Republic, to our country, all these things, China, Russia, whatever. I think the existential threat to our way of life is the administrative state. When you have unelected bureaucrats who are doing the real governing, and in many ways they are, there's statutes and regulations. This is what frustrates me about Congress, Don. They pass these massive 4,000 or 5,000 page bills that are kind of vague, and then they let the bureaucrats fill in the lines with their statutes and regulations, which do the real governing because Congress in many ways is too afraid to take hard stances for fear it will hurt their reelection chances. I think the one thing that your dad has done in the second term, and I'm applauding, is he has shrunk the size of the bureaucracy, I think, to the smallest size since it's been since the 1960s, about 350,000 fewer federal employees. My magic number is 800,000. So we're about halfway there. You have to shrink the size and you have to shrink the scope. I mean, the administrative state, the whole philosophy is it should invade every aspect of our life until salvation is brought to that aspect of life. So we have to shrink that. The other thing that we've got to do, Don, to make it long-term and structural, you got to move any useful parts, and I mean useful is a very small part of the bureaucracy, into the Article I legislative branch. One of my reform ideas would take some of these unelected bureaucrats, put them into the Article 1 legislative branch as part of permanent committees, because then at some point there is some accountability to the elected representatives of the people. So there's some structural changes that have to take place. But the first start, and your dad's on the right path, you have to shrink the size of the bureaucracy. So good steps have been made. We've got to continue that and then try to put some structural things in place. Because you're right. There are tides to the politics in which some other person might come into power and go, oh, I really like this administrative state. We're going to have more bureaucracy. We have to structurally change it, and we haven't done that yet.
Well, I mean, it seems like the entire Democratic apparatus, on the Democrat side is founded on that. The idea, we want to drain the swamp, but the swamp is deep and the swamp has teeth. They're not going to go easily, right? People, I'm sure you've experienced this, me functioning from sort of the real world and the business world and watching the political world, some of these people can only survive in that bureaucracy. They're very good at dealing with bureaucracy. Wouldn't be so good if it didn't have that for a cover. So the natural place is to go back to those places that protect you. The other side is almost entirely dependent on that, because when you break down their ideas, the ideas aren't that bad, but when they're bolstered with endless taxpayer money, and you can sell, with enough of a marketing campaign behind anything, you can sell anything. And to me, it actually seems that the second a Democrat gets back into power, this can all get to the point of no return very quickly.
Yeah, that's the one thing. The structural changes. The thing that concerns me, you can bank on Democrats being Democrats. Well, I would argue socialists and commies. I mean, because that's basically what
they're saying it out loud. You've seen the DSA headlines. I mean, their party platform is very clear, and they're winning mainstream Democrat primaries right now. So that's where the party is. There doesn't mean there's not moderate Democrats in America. I'm sure there are. They just have no representation in Washington, D.C., because you can't win a major election without kowtowing to the radical faction of the party.
Correct. So I don't blame them, to be honest. I don't blame them. They're going to do what they're going to do. I blame Republicans. There are a lot of Republicans that do not have in D.C., that do not have the political will and courage, first of all, to take back their legislative duties. I mean, it's unconstitutional to subdelegate your legislative authority to unelected bureaucrats in the Article 2 branch. That's a whole nother conversation. But you got to take back your legislative power, and you have to decide fundamentally this is antithetical to the constitutional republic, and we're going to go after it through legislative means to deconstruct the administrative state. You do not see enough Republicans committed to that idea. So Democrats are going to be Democrats. I don't worry about them. It's the Republicans that I'm concerned about. You've got to instill in them, and your dad's done a good job on a whole host of fronts, instilling a backbone in them to step up to the plate and do the right thing for the American people.
Yeah, the 5 to 7 Republicans who don't want to vote for the Save America Act. I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
So you're okay with people not having ID or proof of hey, people need ID to go get government assistance, right? They need ID to get on food stamps. It just doesn't get handed to them. They need something, but they don't need it to vote. And when I see, I understand very clearly why the Democrats don't want that. Again, like everything else, of course. We know why they don't want it. They've been able to weaponize that. But for a Republican to either not be able to see that sort of feels like it would be disqualifying of their position. And if they see it and they turn a blind eye to it and they know what's going on, that's almost scarier than they're just too dumb to recognize it.
For self-preservation. Forget everything else. For the self-preservation of the Republican Party as a functioning, strong party in the future, this is like a no-brainer. First of all, it's like a 75, 80% issue.
It's 83% across the board, meaning that's not 83% with Republicans. It's 83% with Americans.
And some demographics that you would think there's no way, Black Americans really want, photo ID. Yeah, they do actually, and it's about 8 out of 10. You're right. I mean, for self-preservation for the party, you would think self-preservation of the country, right? You cannot have a strong, thriving republic, which, by the way, I just want to make this point. Republics are fragile things, right? They can go sideways in a hurry. For the future of this country, you would think, well, we shouldn't have non-citizens voting in this. We shouldn't have non-citizens counted in our census for apportionment. We should actually just have Americans with photo ID voting in our elections to have free, secure, safe elections that both sides can trust on. This is the thing that we have to get back to. Win or lose, we have to get back to where we can actually trust the results. And I think there are so many questions now because of what Democrats have done to call into question the integrity of elections that there's a lot of reform that has to take place.
Yeah, no, it's an issue. I mean, honestly, the fact that we're even having this conversation,
it's crazy.
It's like we're filming an episode of South Park or something like that, right? It's like there are countries that have slid far closer to communism that still have those things, even in their countries, even in dictatorial systems where it's like, at least it's there, and maybe that's part of the plan is say, hey, if people have no faith in their elections, they stop showing up for their elections, and
they do.
The Democrats will capitalize on that. So I imagine that's the plausible answer to why this is going on and why they may not even care on that side, because if our guys are dejected and they say, hey, it doesn't really matter, we won't show up, then they can win with at least the appearance of legitimacy,
right?
And that's still a win for them.
Yeah, veneer of legitimacy. I would argue, yeah, it is kind of shocking. You look at a lot of European Union countries, you have to actually show a photo ID to request an absentee ballot. I think that's something we should be doing here, right? You actually have to do it in person with a photo ID. I want an absentee ballot. But I do think you're right. I think there's been a drive towards, I don't make a difference. What does it matter if I show up or don't show up? It's all rigged anyway. So what's the point? And it does drive a certain amount of apathy, which I would push back on that, Don, because I think these midterms coming up in November, I think it's going to come down to a handful of House races decided by less than 1,000 votes that's going to decide the majority in the House. My dad was in the House, served with Bob Beaupre out of Colorado. You know how much Bob Beaupre won his first congressional race by? 123 votes.
Yeah.
So don't tell me.
The apathy is what's going to kill us. If we allow them to win, and it's a psyop. Don't get me wrong, but
totally.
A win is a win, and as far as they're concerned, and if they can get people to sit out and just be indifferent, and they can pull off a couple seats and stack the courts, we know exactly what they want to do. They've said it out loud.
They're determined to have single party state. They're not even being shy about it. That's why we have the mass rapid invasion, illegal immigrants. That's why they're trying to undermine the integrity of our elections. There's a whole host of things because they are determined to have a single party state, because they are kind of upset, to be honest, with the dirty little peasants who just don't know what's best for them. So if you don't know what's best for you, we're going to rig the thing to make sure we get what we want, and we'll be in charge and then tell you what to do with the rest of your life.
And that's the one that was shocking to me. And I've seen this since 2016 when my dad got in there. So how could this, brash billionaire from New York, how could he know what a regular person wants? Like, it's not that hard if you actually care. Like, it's sort of common sense. That's not so common in DC. But, the fact that they don't know that, these members of Congress, you see them talking about these things. I'm like, man, like, have you ever even spoken to your constituencies? Like, no, I represent them in DC, but I don't have to actually listen to them. I mean, I know better. Most of these people don't. They don't have any real sophistication. They got elected. Maybe they got a good line of shit and they're good on the stump, or they were funded, millions of dollars, in somewhere in the middle of America from California and New York, and that's easy to flood the airwaves and win an election. But it's scary how disjointed they are, and frankly, how much disdain they just have for the people they chose to represent in Washington, D.C. I was like, you don't have to do this job. It's elective, and yet you chose to do it and then do the opposite. And by the way, our side is just as guilty of this. I've seen the amount of Republicans I've campaigned with that I'm like, wow, that was a great stump speech. I was like, why are you doing the opposite next month when you're in D.C.? It's like, well, I just want to get invited to the cool person cocktail party in D.C.
Yep. Yeah, I know that we've lost sight of this. And again, it's Republicans and of course Democrats, but too many Republicans. You were elected. The whole purpose of the government of, by, and for the people is that every day you're supposed to be waking up as the elected representative who you've been made a steward of, the power and money given to you by the people to actually represent their interests and protect and promote them every day. Yeah. And I think a lot of people in DC have lost sight of that. They're not talking with their constituents enough. They've insulated themselves. There are a lot of different things that Congress has done to insulate themselves to make sure that you have like 80% incumbency retention in elections. And I think that's another issue. I'm not sure that I have a really solid answer for that, except for to take out as many of you as you can in primaries to replace them with people and for the people to be more engaged and to hold them accountable. But there's a whole host of issues that goes back to why we've got to go back and say, do we have that moral obligation to the experiment still? Yeah. And you're right. It's not going to be easy. As you mentioned earlier, it's not going to be easy. Yeah. It's going to be hard. There's going to be a lot of slings and arrows. And do we have the will and the courage to actually step into the arena and go, yeah, this is worth the fight?
Yeah, no, and listen, the lawfare, I've seen it against my family, my father especially. A lot of that's not just because they hate Trump. to me, a lot of that was to send a message to anyone
Yes.
else who dares enter their arena. Like, hey guys, don't do it. Don't do it. Just stay in your place, stay in your lane. You can be pretty comfortable. This is our space. Don't even, so someone who's built businesses, created jobs, maybe actually understands, the complexity of some of the things they're voting on, as it relates to, jobs or the economy. Like someone who's actually done that, may actually know more than someone who's never done any of that in their lives, but is a bureaucrat. And so to me, a vast majority of that was, frankly, they hate Trump, obviously, but it was to send a message to anyone else who may come in from the outside. Don't do it. Sit at home. It's not going to be worth your while. And here's why.
It's a chilling effect. I mean, not only did they target your dad for years and years with the lawfare to try and take him out, because they viewed him as an existential threat to the status quo.
Correct.
I mean, he really is. He showed up in D.C. and I think his biggest sin, Don, was essentially coming into D.C. in January of 2017 and announcing for all intents and purposes, I'm the duly elected representative of the American people. I decide. And the administrative state looking in horror like, what do you mean you decide? We decide.
Yeah. And
the fact that he rejected the premise, I think, is one of the greatest sins in the eyes of permanent DC. But you're right. The chilling effect, the way the administrative state ends ultimately is that enough of the American people, first of all, understand what's taking place and then have the courage to stand up and say something about it and demand accountability with their elected representatives. But again, the administrative state, you back a beast into a corner. I call it the American Leviathan for a reason. You back it into a corner, the fangs and the claws come out. And they realize this is an existential threat. This whole movement, America First, Donald Trump, all that, it's an existential threat to their existence in the future. And they are going to do everything they can to tamp down on any attempts to dismantle it and break it. I mean, I love when your dad says, drain the swamp. The foundation of the swamp is the state. If you break the state, you'll drain the swamp.
Yeah.
And they know that. And that's why you see all this taking place.
Honestly, I've seen it with my own eyes here. There's people, they believe, what we believe and what we're talking about right now. They've seen it with their own, then they get in that position of power and it becomes a little bit like Stockholm Syndrome. They're like they fall in love with their captors a little bit. It's like, oh, well, maybe it's not as bad as I think. And it's sort of wild. So it takes a truly special person to be able to do that, not fall in love with your captors, not, give in a little bit and continue to fight because the system is, I don't want to use the word rigged, but it's very rigged in favor of that state. And even those who are true believers against it, tend to get sucked in to, whatever it's offering.
But I would, the thing I noticed, my dad was in the House for 5 terms, and it became very obvious there's a system that wants to conform you to its image.
Yeah.
For you to go along with the status quo. And there are a lot of pressures. There's a lot of incentives.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, a lot of incentives to go along with the flow to be conformed. And you're right, it takes a unique individual with their principles in place and their values in place before they go in. And I mean, that's one of the reasons we do with American Majority. I'm trying to build out a farm team of conservative men and women at the state and local level because A, that's important. But also, if you can build a farm team of principled men and women who have their values and principles in place, a lot of Congress comes from the state and local level. So it's just this whole long-term plan of how do we actually send more men and women, not only to the state and local level to reform that and to do the right thing, to Congress, because we are
100%.
There's some great people in Congress. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to have some blanket
there are, and like at the same time,
we need a lot more.
We tend to. Well, our side, we can't do this because those aren't the norms. It's like, well, the other side breaks the norms every time it's convenient for them, and then they use those same norms. Like, well, you guys can't do this because these are the norms. It's like, wait a second, like we're not even playing the same game so much of the time.
This is what frustrates me so much. Well, these aren't the norms. We've been playing by progressive rules for over 100 years, and the progressive rules are not the norm for a constitutional republic. So please don't say that to me because they broke the rules on norms 100 plus years ago.
Yeah.
So stop playing by the rules. And if we continue to play by their rules, Don, we will lose.
Yeah.
Break the rules. Stop playing the game by their rules. And there's too many Republicans that have accepted the premise, well, this is just how it works in D.C. No, it's not how it's supposed to work at all in a constitutional republic.
Yeah. So, Ned, you founded, American Majority. Tell us a little bit more about that. But my understanding, to train candidates and activists at the grassroots, and that's what we've sort of neglected. It's wonderful to win the presidency, but if you don't have everything below it, honestly, none of it matters. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't matter. And I don't mean House and Senate. I mean like dog catcher, school boards.
Yeah.
Republicans can't win the White House, but still lose local mayoral races, school boards, city councils, prosecutors' offices, all of the institutions that shape daily life, and expect anything to come out of it. What has the conservative movement, gotten wrong about power, and perhaps what's it getting right, and what are you trying to change?
Wow, that's actually a very long. I'll try and keep the answer short. What have they gotten wrong about power? Well, first of all, they have to understand what they're supposed to do with power when given to it. Like, you're given power for a reason. I think conservatives have taken the easy way. I think a lot of conservatives have come to D.C. to kind of be in D.C. It's much easier. The real lasting national generational change begins at the local level. And in many ways, I'm trying to reverse engineer what progressives did.
Yeah.
Progressive movement started as a state and local reform movement, percolated from the ground up, eventually got to DC and had such a broad base of power that it fundamentally changed our government, our society, and our culture.
Yeah, they took over every institution,
everything,
academia, sports, pop culture,
about,
and then they built up. Trump sort of did it the other way because it's not his way to start his dog catcher. It's not. He's going to go for the big one. Then we got to try to backfill, but we need both.
Yeah, no, I mean the long march through the institutions that we talk about from the left, that was decades in the making as they just marched through every institution. But the way we get to the generational change and the long-term, health of the republic is we go back to that state and local, and we gain political power on school boards, on city councils, on county commissions. And I would argue, listen, there's a lot of good things. DC is important. I don't want to dismiss that in any way. There's a lot of important things that happen at the federal level. State and local probably impacts your daily life far more than anything that happens in DC. And if you want to see real change begin in your community, you've got to become more involved in the state and local level.
100%. I mean, to me, it's a no-brainer. Get involved. Get on your school board. If your children aren't indoctrinated, with the propaganda, guess what? Like, you don't have to try to spend their 20s and 30s trying to get them back when they realize it and they wake up and they lost 20 years of of their life pushing this nonsense. I mean, we just talked about voter ID and non-citizens voting. I mean, if a political machine fights basic election safeguards while simultaneously claiming to defend democracy, is that just hypocrisy, or is the confusion and distrust itself part of what keeps that machine in power? I think we sort of touched on it, but I wanted to get a little bit more into detail on it.
Well, first of all, let's define democracy. All right, whenever the left uses our democracy, what they really mean, Don, is the status quo administrative state. We're in power, you're not. That's what they mean by we have to defend our democracy.
Yeah, and we're a republic, not a democracy, which they also tend to try to mix up into the same concept, and they're not.
That was the next point I was going to make. Like, can we also have the conversation? We're representative democracy. We're a constitutional compound republic. Pure democracy was actually rejected by the founders, so it's antithetical to the founding. But I do think, there's a whole host of things going on to detach the American people from being involved in government. That was the whole point of progressivism, not to go back and delve too much in this, but the whole idea of progressivism was to separate out the administration of government from the politics of it. So they wanted to actually separate and have these bureaucrats completely insulated from the American people. No redress of grievances, no being elected or unelected by the people. And so there's been this attempt over the last 100 and some years just to detach the American people from the real governing in America. And once you start to get the feeling that my voice doesn't make a difference, it does make you more apathetic, more subservient, more compliant. Mm-hmm. So I would argue the last 114 years, we've been experiencing this effort to really detach us from Republican values. And by I mean lowercase, Republican values of citizenship. And that's something, again, that I'm trying to do with Thread of Liberty. We have to renew that. We have to renew the obligation. We have to renew that instinctive patriotism. And even more so, Don, as you go through this documentary, I hope people watch it, there are moments when you say, there's no way this is going to succeed.
Yeah.
And for people to be self-defeating and go, I'm not going to be involved because it's not going to succeed. Well, what would have happened if Washington said, you know what, screw this. We're up against the greatest
empire in the world. It's
a
little chilly tonight.
I'm not going to, I'm up against it. I have no men, no supplies. He went for it. And I think we have to renew that spirit again of like, no matter the challenges or the cost or what we think we're up against, there are so many generations before us that actually put it on the line for us. So I think we have an obligation to the generations that came before to renew the struggle, renew the restoration, and we have an obligation to the generations that will come after us. And it depends on what we have the ability to do right now. And I hope we're up to the challenge.
As do I. And I think, again, the big one's going to be save America, because if you don't get that, it makes absolutely no sense to me. But
self-preservation, very obvious.
What's the inside baseball though there? In your mind, if the Save America Act, had a bunch of goodies for lobbyists who'd, with the vote count look different in the Senate, how much are lobbyists running the show in this one, or is it just Republicans being too weak to stand up for what? Not just their constituency, but literally 83% of the American people want. I mean, I sort of feel like an 80-20 issue is the holy grail of politics. It doesn't exist almost. And yet, this is such a big one, and you still have that headache.
Well, if I were to, if you look at like Tom Tillis, I would argue that he's such a petty little man. Is probably some resentment towards your dad. That's how petty some of these guys are. So we can talk about some of the other.
You see it with what is it, Randy Fine down in Florida? Like, if you don't fire influencer Alex Brusiewicz, I won't vote for any. I'm like, well, you're going to tell that to the people who voted at, what is it, like a +30 Republican district, so you're not going to go along with the administration in a +3 majority because you want them to fire an influencer that happened to be like an effective influencer in the campaign because you don't like what he said about you, which may or may not be 100% accurate.
I would argue in many ways, I just think it comes down to some real pettiness because of, your dad has come in and in many ways displaced some of these people, whether it's Mitch McConnell, you name it. And so there's some bitterness and resentment. They're no longer running the party. And so I would argue at a very basic level, it comes down to a great degree of pettiness because these people are so small and so selfish that they cannot get outside of themselves to look at for the good of the party, for the good of the country. Maybe we should do this. So, I don't even want to know like lobbyists, all that stuff. I just think it's like imperfect human nature on steroids.
Yeah. No. So, Ned, give us the bold prediction. When America reaches, 275 or 300, will we be a stronger constitutional republic than we are today, or will the administrative state have won? What decides it?
The next 10 or 12 years. I'm gonna take a little bit of a qualified answer to that, Don, because I think in many ways it's very hard to predict the future. It depends on what this current generation does. I would argue that in many ways the next 10 or 12 years are absolutely critical to the future of this country. I mean, one of the things I teach at American Majority all the time is politics is policy. You have to win political fights to be in the right place to implement the right policy. So my goal in many ways is to make sure we win the political fights, to put the right people in the right place, to make the right decisions for as long as possible. And, we got to win in 26. We got to win in 28. We have to have political power in 2030 to do the census correctly. If we do the census correctly, mass deportations can, continue, differential privacy algorithm out the door, citizenship question, all that. You could see 25 to 40 House seats and electoral votes move to red states. Then I feel very confident about the future of the republic because you will have sent the left, and by that I mean the Democratic Party, into the political wilderness at least for a decade, if not a generation. So let's see where we are in 6 years and I'll give you a better answer.
Yeah. Well, Ned, Ryun, thank you very much. Tell us again where people can find the documentary to check it out. Show your kids, let them understand what's really happening because they're not going to get that from the standard algorithm on TV.
They're not. Threadofliberty.com. It's for free. Go watch it. The companion book is coming out next week, Dawn. It'll be on Amazon. But go watch it. It's free. It's 85 minutes. I hope that people get a better understanding of who we are, but also come away inspired and go, I feel a deeper obligation to this experiment, and by God, I'm going to fight for it.
Well, appreciate it, man. Thank you very much for what you're doing, and look forward to having you back on soon. Good luck with all of it.
All right, thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Guys, thanks so much for tuning in. Again, make sure you're liking, sharing, subscribing. Hit the little like button right now. Just do it right now, and then share it with like 10, 20, 30, 2,000 of your closest friends. Subscribe so you never miss an episode, okay? If you do miss the show here on Rumble, if your friends get their podcast different ways, share with them our link to Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Make sure that we're getting the word out. Check out our sponsors down below and in the video description, okay? It takes guts to support a show like this. Support those who share your values. And as always, stay strong, stay informed, stay engaged, and, always stay just a little bit triggered. Thanks a lot, guys. I'll talk to you all again very soon. I hope you all have an awesome weekend, and I guess we'll talk on Monday. Have a good one.